In a small corner of Mexico, where the stone streets keep stories of centuries, the city of Guanajuato witnessed, in October 1957, an event that challenged the boundaries between life and death. Is it possible that a mother's love was so intense as to reverse the fate of her children? This question would gain unexpected meaning that morning, when the air carried the sweet smell of the freshly bundled canis to the market and the bells of the Basilica of Our Lady echoed softly over the roofs of red tiles, painting a typical picture of colonial cities. It was a time when families were large, children played freely for the alleys and life followed a quiet pace. In Rua dos Cantoritos, near the historic center, the Hernandez, humble and working family lived. Don Esteban spent his days in the silver mines that had made the region famous, while Dona Maria took care of the house and 6 children. Adobe's house was always full of laughter, baby cries, and the constant movement of a large family. On the morning of October 15th, as usual, Maria woke up the children for another day of school. Carlos, 9, was the most responsible, always looking at the minor brothers. Esperanza, 7, was the most taken, with a laugh that infects everyone. Both had birthmarks that made them special, a reddish half-moon on Carlos' forehead and 3 small spots on Esperanza's right arm, like aligned stars. "Hurry up, otherwise they will be late," shouted Maria from the kitchen while preparing the bean tacos for the children's lunch. The smell of pan mingled with the scent of warm tortillas on the stove. Carlos and Esperanza said goodbye with kisses, as they always did. Esperanza still ran back to give her mother a tight hug. "I love you so much, Mom," he said, with the spontaneity that only children have. "I love you too, my angel." "Be careful," said Maria, while the two ran down the stone street, their footsteps echoing between the old walls. Accompanying them with Pedrito Salazar, a thin, shy boy who lived a few blocks below. Benito Juarez was just 10 blocks from there, a path they knew by color. They passed the market, crossed the main square and descended down the street that was directly led to school. It was a safe route, made hundreds of times. But that morning, something would change forever. At 8:15 a.m., when church bells marked the hour, a cargo truck that carried goods to the market lost brakes on the descent of Rua do Calvario. The driver, Don Aurelio Mendoza, an experienced man who knew every curve of those streets, fought desperately to control the vehicle, but the slope was steep and the load, too heavy. Carlos, Esperanza and Pedrito had been running on the opposite sidewalk, laughing at something the teacher had said the day before. They didn't see the runaway truck. They did not hear the driver's warning shouts. What happened next would shake not only the fate of the Hernandez family, but also the way we understand the deepest mysteries of existence. The impact was so strong that it echoed like thunder through the streets. Market traders dropped their baskets of fruits and vegetables and ran to the scene. The ladies who bought tortillas blessed themselves, while their horror shouts mingled with the smoke that came out of the listed truck. Don Aurelio, who had jumped from the vehicle seconds before the crash, wounded in the soul much deeper than any injured in the body. As he approached the bodies of the children, his legs trembled so much that he had to lean on a pole so as not to fall. Carlos had died on the spot. His little body rested on the stones, with a tranquility that contrasted with the violence of the accident. The mark on his forehead, that half-moon that Maria said it seemed like a smile, now was covered with blood and dust. Esperanza had been thrown a few meters away. His 3 spots on his right arm were the only intact stroke in the fragile body, destroyed by the impact. Pedrito Salazar, the friend who accompanied them, was more lucky. He was seriously injured, but still breathed. The news came to Hernandez's house in the worst possible way. It was Dona Remedies, the neighbor of the front, who ran to the courtyard, screaming desperate. "Maria! Maria! Come fast! They are your children!" The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. Maria felt the world stop. His hands, which seconds before they washed the coffee dishes, began to tremble without control. "What happened to my children?" he asked, with a voice that didn't even seem to be yours. "It was the truck in the market. You need to come now." Maria ran barefoot through the streets, her feet bleeding in the sharp stones, but without pain. The only thing that mattered was to reach their children, hug them, confirm that it was all a nightmare. But upon arriving at the place, your world collapsed. The bodies of Carlos and Esperanza were covered with shawls that the women on the market had placed on them. Even so, Maria immediately recognized them by the shoes, the way they were when they slept, small and defenseless. No. No. His scream did not seem human. She threw herself over her children, hugging them with a force that came from the depths of her torn soul. Wake up, please wake up. Esteban came running from the mines, still with the helmet in his head and his dirty hands. Seeing the scene, it stopped sharply. His legs, used to carrying 50-pounder bags, could not support him. He fell to his knees over the stones, crying as he had not cried since he was a child. Father Sebastian of the Church of Refuge has come to give the extreme utterance. His hands trembled as he made the sign of the cross in the children's tests. In 40 years of priesthood, he had performed many funerals, but had never seen such a pure pain, as devastating as Maria Hernandez. He was crouching next to a broken branch, simulating it was the steering wheel of a truck. In a voice too serious for a 3-year-old, she repeated, "Be careful, Carlos, this way is dangerous." The mother said to go down the main street. Maria dropped the wooden spoon in the pan. The words, the intonation, even the gestures of the girls were identical to those of their dead children. She would recognize that tone of voice anywhere. It was the way Esperanza called her older brother when he distracted himself on the path of school. It was the way Carlos, with his 8 years of early responsibility, warned the sister about the dangers of the streets of Guanajuato. Maria's hands shaved when she opened the back door. The twins stopped playing as they saw her, as if they had been caught in something forbidden. Jimena, or would it be Hope? He ran to hug his legs while Lucia, Carlos, standed, looking at the ground with the same serious expression that his eldest son had when he was worried. "Mama, why do you Laura's?" asked Jimena, passing his fingers through Maria's wet cheek. It was the same question that Esperanza asked whenever she saw her mother cry. The same slope of head, the same tone of sweet and worried voice. Maria sank her fingers into the girl's hair, seeking some difference, some proof that it was just her uncontrolled imagination. But everything was there, the smell, the texture of the hair, to the little scar behind the left ear, just like the Esperanza had one by falling from the bicycle at 5. That night Esteban found his wife sitting on the girl's room floor surrounded by lit candles. Among her knees, she held the family's photographs album, opened on the page where Carlos and Esperanza posed smiling on the day of her first communion. The twins slept in bed, hand in hand, as they always did. "Ilos volvieron," Maria whispered, without taking his eyes off the children. "In son Lucia y Jimena. Son Elos." Esteban wanted to argue, to say it was the morning speaking, that the desire had cloudy its reason. But then Lucia fell asleep and murmured something unintelligible. He approached and, for a moment he swore he heard his son's voice, "Papa, el camión viene muy quick." The air got heavy. The two remained silent, hearing the girl's irregular breath, as if the room was full of ghosts or miracles. Why, after all, what was more terrifying, the idea that their children had returned or the certainty that they had never gone somehow? The girls could not identify any specific order. Among the images, there was one especially old, a faded photo of the market accident, taken by a reporter before authorities isolated the area. The scene showed the listed truck, the tents destroyed and, in the lower right corner, almost imperceptible, 2 small bodies covered by a white sheet. "Shall we play guessing?" Dr. Ramirez proposed with a kind smile, pointing to the photos. "Who tells me where this place is?" Lucia reached out about an image of the main square, with her iron benches and the leafy lauriers. "Here where he was touching," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Jimena, in turn, slid his hand over the photo of the teacher's yellow house. "I lived there, maestra. Daba dulces cuando we sacrificed diez en math," he added, without taking his eyes off the image. Dr. Ramirez felt a shiver travel the back of his neck. Until then, everything could be explained by casual comments heard at home, distorted memories, or the fertile imagination of children. But those photos had never been shown to the twins. He had not even mentioned them. And this one? He asked, discreetly sliding the photo of the crash to the center of the table, as if it were one of so many. The two girls stopped breathing. Jimena backed up a step, his eyes wide, as if he had seen a ghost. Lucia, however, extended his handy hand and touched the white sheet in the image. "Ahi, we are nosotros," he whispered. The silence that followed was so dense that even the tick of the wall clock seemed to have stopped. Maria, who watched everything from the corner of the room, took her hands to her mouth to drown out a scream. Dr. Ramirez, for the first time in his career, felt the weight of doubt undermining his certainties. "Bao, you know that this son uses?" he asked, the voice drier than he intended. Lucia looked at him with an expression that did not belong to a 3-year-old. It was a tired look, as if it carried the weight of a memory that was not yours. "Because you duel," he said simply. "Cuando él camionas, we feel a big muy big. As you left us by la mitad." Jimena, who had hitherto remained silent, added in a thread. "Pero después ya en dolió más. Soy el cuedo el frío." Dr. Ramirez closed the notebook. His hands, always so firm when writing down data, trembled slightly. There was no scientific explanation for that. There was no psychological theory that embraced the accuracy of those answers, the raw emotion in the girl's voice, the way their bodies seemed to relive a pain they had never experienced. When he said goodbye, Maria accompanied him to the door. His eyes were red but dry, as if they no longer had tears to cry. "Tell me the truth, doctor," he said, his arm followed tightly. "They are they, aren't they?" The man of science, who had dedicated his life to unraveling mysteries with logic and method, looked at the sky of Guanajuato, where the first stars began to blink. For the first time, there was no answer. Just a dark feeling that sometimes reality was much more complex than any theory could explain. "I'll need more time," he murmured, more to himself than for her. But they both knew it was not the missing time. It was something much bigger. Something that neither science nor faith nor the love of a mother could name. There was no specific order in the photographs that Dr. Ramirez showed the twins. Did they recognize some places? The following answers were meticulously recorded in their notes, a material that would later become part of his book Children Who Resemble Past Lives, a question about reincarnation. Jimena immediately pointed out to a photo of the market, taken in 1956. "That's where the bad thing happened," he said in such a low whisper that the doctor had to lean to hear. Lucia, in turn, took another image, that of Benito Juarez Primary School, and stated naturally, "This is our school. My teacher was called Miss Lupita." A shiver traveled the spine of Dr. Ramirez. He had already confirmed, in his archives, that Carlos and Esperanza's teacher was actually called Guadalupe, although everyone was affectionately called her Lupita. He then showed them a picture of a street with no relationship with the accident or to the children's lives. The two girls looked indifferently, shrugging in unison. "We don't know," they said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. In the next 3 hours, the Dr. Ramirez subjected the twins to a series of tests. They accurately identified the house of the former teacher, the store where they bought sweets, even the exact corner where they used to wait for their father when leaving the mines. But they failed completely when trying to recognize places built after 1957 or that Carlos and Esperanza had never visited. "This is scientifically impossible," the doctor murmured that night as he reviewed his notes in the colonial hotel room where he was staying. "There is no way these children have access to this specific information." He decided to extend his stay in Guanajuato for another week, determined to perform even more strict tests. Each day he brought new evidence that challenged his rational understanding of the world. On the 4th day of investigation, he asked permission to take the twins to the cemetery. I wanted to observe if there would be any reaction when visiting the tombs of Carlos and Esperanza. The Guanajuato Municipal Pantheon was a marble tombstone labyrinth and of forged iron crosses, wrapped by the murmur of the cypresses balanced by the wind. Dr. Ramirez deliberately walked several ways, observing the reactions of Jimena and Lucia. For 10 minutes, the girls looked bored, complaining about the cold and asking to return home. But when they arrived at the section where Carlos and Esperanza were buried, something extraordinary happened. Both stopped abruptly, as if they had bumped into an invisible wall. Lucia began to cry, not the sly crying of a 2-year-old, but a deep, distressed weeping, as if reliving an old pain. Jimena, without hesitation, walked directly to Carlos' tomb. He could not read the tombstone, but put his little hand on the cold stone and said, with a simplicity that froze the doctor's blood, "Here is my old body." Dr. Ramirez knew he needed irrefutable evidence before publicizing his discoveries. The scientific community was relentless with research on paranormal phenomena, and its academic reputation was at stake. Therefore, he devised an experiment that would be known as one of the most rigorous ever performed in the study of reincarnation cases. In January 1961, he organized what he called the definitive test. He contacted Dom Aurelio Mendoza, the truck driver who had run over Carlos and Esperanza. The man, now 60, lived in prison near Guanajuato, consumed by a guilt that had been with him for over 3 years. "Dom Aurelio," said the doctor during a visit to his modest adobe house, "I need you to participate in an experiment, but you should promise you will not say a single word about the accident of that day." "I don't understand why you want me, doctor. He was the worst day of my life." "Precisely for that. You are the only living person who witnessed every detail of that accident. I need you to watch these girls and tell me if you recognize something familiar in them." Dom Aurelio accepted it, moved more for curiosity than for the desire to relive that tragedy. The experiment was conducted in the courtyard of the Hernandez house on a Saturday morning when the sun drew long shadows among the bougainvilleas. Dr. Ramirez positioned a 16mm movie camera to document everything. Maria kept the twins, now 2.5 years old, distracted in the courtyard, while Dom Aurelio hid behind the kitchen door, where he could watch them without being seen. "Girls," Dr. Ramirez called, "can you show me how they were going to school?" Jimena and Lucia exchanged a look that contained a silent communication, something the doctor had already noticed frequently between them. Without hesitation, they began to stage a scene that would shake any witness. Jimena took Lucia's hand, and the two walked down the courtyard, shaking their arms together as the brothers did when they were happy somewhere. "Come on, Esperanza, who are already late," Jimena said, with a strangely mature voice for her age. "I'm going, Carlos, but my shoe is loose," Lucia answered, stopping to adjust his right foot, just as Esperanza had done that fatal morning. Dom Aurelio, in his hidden, began to tremble. Dr. Ramirez noticed that the man had paled as chalk. The twins continued the representation with details that cut the air like blades. Jimena pointed to a corner of the courtyard and shouted, "Esperanza! Care! Do, the truck has no brake." Both turned to where the vehicle was supposed to be, with expressions of genuine terror in their children's faces. Lucia clung to Jimena's arm, just as Esperanza clung to Carlos's final seconds. "We can't run," shouted Lucia. "The stones are wet." Then they slipped simultaneously, falling to the ground floor of the courtyard just as they had fallen over the moist pavement of the market street. The sound of the imaginary impact echoed in silence as a revived nightmare. Dom Aurelio staggered by his hidden, with tears running down his face marked by time. "My God," he murmured. "It's exactly as it happened. Every movement, every word, it's the same." He approached the twins, who now played quietly as if nothing had happened, and knelt before them. "Do you forgive me?" he asked, his voice broken. "Can you forgive me for what happened?" Jimena looked at him with those eyes that sometimes seemed to keep the wisdom of other lives. "We forgive, Mr. Aurelio. We know it was not your fault. The truck had no brake." Dom Aurelio began to sob in an uncontrolled way. For 3 years, he had carried the weight of the death of those children, and now, at that moment, they were themselves, in those little new bodies, which gave them the forgiveness they needed so much. Dr. Ramirez turned off the camera with handy hands. In 30 years of career, he had never witnessed something that so deeply shaken the foundations of reason. But there, in that sunny courtyard of Guanajuato, the border between the possible and the impossible had broken down like smoke to the wind. The death itself. Science, with its rigorous methods, could discuss evidence for decades, but for those who lived that story, the truth was engraved in gestures, in eyes, in detail that no theory could explain. Dr. Ramirez carefully kept the objects in the shoebox, the hands still slightly trembling. It was not just the confirmation that those children recognized lives of lives they had not lived, it was the way they did, with a naturalness that could only be born from the deepest memory. The pink last, the blue canic, there were no mere objects, but bridges between two times that had somehow intertwined. When the study results were published in 1962, the case of the Hernandez twins not only shook the academic circles, but became a lighthouse for those looking for answers beyond the limits of logic. For Maria, however, the report pages and black and white photographs were just a pale reflection of what she saw every day, her daughters, playing in the same courtyard where, years earlier, 2 other children had run under the same sun. The difference was that now, laughter does not interrupt with the sound of a brake scratching the asphalt. The years passed, and with them, the memories of Carlos and Esperanza were dissolving, as paint in the water. At the age of 5, Jimena no longer talked about Canica of Luck as if he had found her in Rio, now she kept her in a carved wooden box, a gift from Dr. Ramirez. Lucia did not mention Aunt Rosario anymore, but the pink last still adorned her hair on party days, like a silent inheritance. "This is how it happens," explained the doctor to the girl's mother during their visits. "Souls are not coming back to get stuck in the past, but to heal what was open. When the wound closes, they move on." And Mary watched in silence as her daughters grew. Jimena, rather a mirror of Carlos' seriousness, now designed Guanajuato landscapes with color that seemed invented, as if to see the world through a filter that only she had. Lucia, who had once repeated Esperanza's trees, developed such a sweet voice that the neighbors stopped to hear her sing at the afternoons, accompanied only by the sound of the cicadas. "They are, but they are not," Maria thought as she saw them running among the bougainvilleas. The birth marks the half moon of Jimena, the 3 spots of Lucia remained, as signatures of an old pact. But the personalities who flourished there were new, damp with life, like sprouts after the rain. Don Aurelio Mendoza, the man who had once carried the guilt like a cross, now sitting at the family table on Sundays, telling stories of the Guanajuato of Anthonjo while sharing sweets of tamarindo with girls. "Do you remember me?" You sometimes asked with a shy smile. "Of course, Lord," they answered. The Lord drove the truck. But there were no tears, no shadow of resentment. It was as if the forgiveness, once given, had dissolved to the memory of suffering. The case of the twins did not only change the Hernandez family, echoed the city like a bell. Father Sebastián began to include, in his homilies, reflections on the soul that is not erased, about the ties that even death is untied. Mothers who cried lost children came to the Cantorites' house, not in search of miracles, but any sign that love could, yes, find paths back. Some left candles lit at the gate, others just touched the wall, as if he could feel the heat of a familiar presence. Between 1961 and 1975, Dr. Ramirez documented more than 500 similar accounts throughout Mexico, inspired by the history of Jimena and Lucia. Not all had the same strength as the twins' evidence, but everyone shared something, the unshakable certainty of those who had been touched by something bigger. "What we have learned," wrote the doctor in his final book, "is not that reincarnation is possible, but that love is more stubborn than death." Carlos and Esperanza did not return by chance. They came back because there was a heart waiting for them. When they turned 15, Jimena and Lucia were young like any others, though, perhaps, with a different glow in the eyes. They studied at the same school where, decades earlier, their brothers had left the notebooks on their wallets. Sometimes, as he passed the corridors, Jimena stopped for a moment, as if he heard an echo. But soon he went ahead, because life, after all, always calls louder than the shadows. Maria, now with silver hair on her hair and wrinkles that told a story of pain and redemption, used to sit in the courtyard at dusk, watching her daughters. People ask if I think they were really Carlos and Esperanza, he confessed to Dr. Ramirez in his last formal conversation. I answer that it doesn't matter. What matters is that when I needed it, the universe gave me a way to hold back the hands I thought I lost forever. Today, those who pass through the discreet plaque in the Garden of the Union where the mariachis still play La Adelita for tourists, perhaps not even note their existence. But for those who know, it is a reminder that there is love that does not fit in tombs, that there are wounds that only the impossible can heal. And that, on any street from Guanajuato, 2 children once proved that death, after all, can be just an ajar door. And death, which we fear so much, turned out there only as a temporary fall asleep. In honor of Jimena and Lucia, who taught us that certain farewells are just until soon, the house of Rua Los Cantoritos follows standing, inhabited by generations of the Hernandez family. Patio bougainvilleas bloom each year more vigorously, as if they drink from a source of love that never exhauses. They say the elders in the neighborhood that, in the afternoons of October when the wind goes down the mountains carrying the smell of copal and dusty memories, it is still possible to hear laughter of children in that backyard. Laughter who sound like echoes of souls who rediscovered the way from home and, after fulfilling their mission of love, could finally rest in peace. Death carries the bodies, but never touches the tissue ties in the heart of a mother who loves without measures. If this story has touched you, share with those who need to remember that true love does not go out. And tell us, have you ever lived any experience that challenged logic, an unexpected encounter with who is gone? Your story may be the next we unravel. Be aware, there are more cases like this, which borders the borders between the possible and the impossible, waiting for you.